Okay, so I think in India is actually leading that, but I think it's going to really accelerate, which is the government-led initiatives around invoicing, e-way bills, pushing for financing and enabling, financing platforms for MSMEs, right? So my company is essentially focused on B2B accounts receivable and payables automation. So I'm talking with respect to that. So India already we see, government kind of enabling digitization in this space. Globally, now that there is going to be a replication of that. For example, France is going to kind of go into an e-invoice format by 2024-25, similar to what India has done. The Middle East, which is Saudi Arabia, has just kind of gone into a invoice kind of a format, right? So India is almost the trendsetter, right, in this matter, and that's going to keep happening in other parts of the world, which over the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years, is really going to enable digital transformation in the B2B accounts receivable payables area. The challenge is the next financial year. Definitely, it's a growth related to some extent because there is a likely recession, right? In many of the developed economies, right? So Europe, UK, high probability, US, reasonable probability, China, reasonable probability, right? So that is going to kind of challenge growth. Okay, so think about, from an India perspective, export growth could kind of keep coming down. Maybe there is a challenge to some of the IT industry, so on and so forth, right? So growth worldwide, already the World Bank is reducing those numbers. Okay, I think it is now about 3.2% global growth from greater than 4% some time back. So that is going to challenge top lines. Okay. The second thing is today oil prices are quite high, still greater than, let's say, $100 or whatnot, right? Now, if there is going to be recession, hopefully that price will come down. But if there is a supply side issue, like the Russian, crisis, and if there is going to be war in Libya, whatever, right? And if that supply side doesn't get solved, then on one side you have revenues coming down. On the other side, right, you have costs kind of continuing to be the same but going up. So profitability squeeze could start coming into picture. And the third dimension is because of recessionary pressures, consumer demand may come down, right? So there are three potential impacts. The next 1 year, I think people have to be kind of conservative on their spends and on the P&Ls, etc., right? For smaller companies to sustain and for larger companies to kind of show interesting financial numbers. So see, COVID has, forced everybody, CFOs, treasury heads, CEOs across industries, across supply chains, to rethink the business model of executing work. What do I mean by that? I mean, today, employees can work from anywhere, right? People are trying to get employees back to office. Many of them don't want to come to office, right? The new generation who's kind of passing out of colleges and going to be the new labor, right? Moving forward. Their aspirations are not necessarily to go in office and do a 8 to 5 or whatever, 9 to 5 kind of a job, right? They may want a little bit more gig types, flexible work. Now, because of all of that, there needs to be platforms, right, which support that capability, right, of working from anywhere, distributed labor, people working for 2 hours and not the standard 9-10 hours, in work, the whole gig economy kind of stuff. Think about having gig workers in every part of your organization, right? Let's say accounts receivable, people are doing recon. They may not be 8-hour working people. They may be 5 people working for 2 hours each, right? Kind of stuff. So companies now are starting to think of that, right? From how are they going to enable it? Okay. That's where it's kind of beneficial for companies and SaaS companies and technology organizations like us, because now companies are far more readier to have those technology transformation, finance transformation kind of discussions as compared to pre-COVID. Okay, so see, two things. Okay, so one is we are a SaaS company, right? Which is software as a service kind of company. Now, in the past, right, though you could get the core tech developed in, let's say, countries like India, you still needed sales organizations in the US, UK, wherever, right? Your markets where you want to kind of sell to. Okay? Now, thanks to the pandemic in some way, right, people are used to doing everything on Zoom, right, or Teams or Google Hangouts or whatnot, right? The advantage of that is we can now have a very thin sales organization, right? In domestically in the countries which is expensive, and have a larger sales organization anywhere, right? At with at a better cost point, hence improving the overall profitability, right, of the Indian IT industry, the SaaS product kind of companies, etc., etc. So that's one very interesting trend, right? The second is because of COVID, right? This was I alluded to this earlier in the previous answer of mine, but because of COVID, CFOs, CEOs, treasury heads on the finance domain are seeing an absolute need to transform, right? And without tech, with all the cool new SaaS tech that's which we do and some of our competitors kind of bring to the table, it's a phenomenal opportunity for them to do it at a significantly lower cost point as compared to before, and at an ROI which is unparalleled, right? So that's what the disruption has kind of helped. The last 2 years disruption has kind of helped. So hot topic. So with respect to global recession, I think the answer is slightly a bit more nuanced than generalizing it. So I've been extensively traveling to the US, Europe. I live in the Middle East, and I'm here now in India, right? So I have a little bit of a first-hand view of what's kind of happening in some of those geographies, in addition to actually reading articles and economics, etc. Now, my belief is Europe is definitely going to go into a recession. Okay, whether it's UK, whether it's continental Europe. Couple of reasons there. Okay, one is the inflation kind of running quite high. What that's actually cost for, let me give you an example, right? So let's assume in a particular household in the UK, they used to spend £200 a month, let's say a year or two back, in terms of their utility spend. Today, the same spend is probably £600, right? So that's a 3x kind of an increase. That is going to be probably further exacerbated because of the Russian, the gas crisis, etc. That's kind of happening, right, in UK and Europe. The second is, at least for example, in the UK, it's a very tight labor market, meaning thanks to Brexit, there is a serious paucity of labor there in terms of, not necessarily the higher end jobs, but the mid to lower end kind of jobs. So you guys may have read of the truck crisis, right? The truckers kind of went on strike, right, in the UK. Then the metro or the tube was on strike, etc., etc. So yes, those geographies are going to go into a bit of a recession, right? Now going to the UK, well, it is mixed signals actually. The inflation is running quite high, but at the same time, the labor market has been awesome, right? The unemployment numbers are still quite low. Salaries are fairly high. What that means is because the salaries continue to be decent and high, the consumer spend is still holding on, right? And the spending power continues in the US, right? So my view, it's like a 50-50, whether it'll kind of go into a recession and that kind of stuff. Even if it does, I think it's going to be, it'll come out soon. Okay? China, very similar to the US, but for different reasons. Now, the real estate, I think about 30%, or it's a very high number of China GDP is real estate. Okay? A lot of it is state funded, and because of the banks kind of lending, etc., to the construction industry, so on and so forth. That's come down. Okay, you guys would have read about the buyers, home buyers, stopping mortgage payments, etc., in China. So it's a serious crisis, I believe, right there. That complemented or supplemented by the fact that China is a big exporter, right? So export revenues, and as the demand globally kind of comes down, the export is going to also kind of be challenged, right? And then the zero COVID policy, which China is kind of following. So given all of this, there is a very high likelihood of China going into that. So three big economies, right? US, Europe, China, big possibility of recession, etc. Now, how does that impact India, right? Again, my belief is India probably not going to go into a recession because I think some of the industry growth, the fact that Indian companies have done a phenomenal job over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of saving costs, etc., right? Growth is going to slow down. There is going to be some challenge in profitability, right? But I think India is not going to go into recession. Okay. Now, the second thing that could help India is if there is a recession, then hopefully oil prices will come down. If it does, oil is one of the biggest imports, right, for India. Similarly, raw material costs, right, copper and all the metal costs, right, hopefully it'll kind of come down. which will be beneficial from a cost perspective for the Indian industry. So India, I think, should be in an okay situation. Well, I was in the first physical event I attended after in the last, let's say, 2.5 years was in San Francisco, which is the Finovate event about, let's say, 2 months, 3 months back. And this is the first physical event I'm attending in India, right, for the last 3 years. So, firstly, awesome, right? Meaning just the fact that you're able to physically meet people, because interacting and doing events on Zoom and Teams and all that has its limitations. Okay, so firstly, well done to ETCFO that you guys have put this together, and you can see the enthu from the number of people and the interaction that's kind of happening, around. So that's point number one. Point number two is, change is the new constant. It's apparent, right? Before, let's assume this was the pace of change. Then it, because of COVID, it kind of went like this. Today, it's an even more, steeper line, right? Because of cost points changing, because of new types of revenue models kind of coming in, right? Sustainability and ESG becoming like a very zero carbon, right, kind of initiatives becoming super important, and the government kind of pushing a digital agenda, right? It's all the CFO's problem or CFO's opportunity, whichever way you kind of look at it, right? So the fact that all of that is now out in the table, being discussed as a group, as a team, is pretty cool. So I think it's a great event, and congratulations to ET to put it together.